안녕하세요. 연합인포맥스의 서영태 기자입니다. 하나로 TDF로 유명한 NH 아문디 운용 아실 텐데요. NH 아문디 운용의 파트너사인 올스프링에서 에디칭 매니저를 모시고 오늘 인사이트 한번 들어볼까 합니다. 우리나라 분들의 은퇴 자금을 맡고 계신 분이니까요. 어떤 말씀 해주실지 정말 기대됩니다. Nice to meet you, Mr. Chang.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Please tell us about Allspring Global Investment, please. It is known as the first TDF manager. And what is TDF and what is your role at Allspring? Yeah.
Okay, so Allspring Global Investment is a global asset manager. So we manage more than 570 billions of the asset under advisement, with around 1,400 of the full-time employee dedicated to the business. Out of those 1,400, we have more than 400 of the investment professionals. So it's a truly investment-led business. In terms of what is a target date fund, essentially it is a very simple investment concept that the risk of your investment is going to become more and more conservative when our investors are reaching their retirement age. And then the transition between that at the early age that is actually more return seeking to your later retirement age becomes more capital preservation. The change of this asset allocation is what we call the glide path as a key point of the target date fund. So my role actually in the Allspring Global Investment is I am in charge of the portfolio management and the research function of our international business. And the team is what we call the multi-asset solution team. And then we are actually at the forefront of many of the financial innovation. In fact, as you mentioned, we launched the first target date fund back in 1994. And since then, that the target date fund concept in the US has actually grown into one of the biggest investment in the retirement investment universe. This is also part of our DNA as a research and innovation. Another big part of our innovation you probably have heard is called factor investment. So in the late 90s, that we are one of the pioneers to us contributing to the factor investment. In fact, quite a few of our publications are well recognized by the industry as well as the academics. So I hope that can give you an idea of who we are and how we actually contribute to the overall industry.
So I heard that you have a partnership with NH Amundi Asset Management. So what kind of partnership do you have, and could you describe it in detail?
Yes. So NH Amundi and Allspring, we form a very strong partnership in developing the local retirement solution, what we call the Hanoro Target Date Funds. And the key points, two key points in the Hanoro Target Date Funds. The first one is, while we have this long history and experience in managing the retirement asset in the US, but when we develop the Hanoro Target Date Fund, we actually take a lot of what we call the local considerations in designing the Hanoro Target Date Fund. For example, in Korea, that the typical income replacement rate is a bit lower than the US, because in the US, the government-sponsored pension is much lower, Social Security is lower. So that will be the local consideration that we put into part of the design. The second differentiation point is how we work with NH Amundi together to assess and evaluate and select the different investment, whether it's a local as well as a global investment, or whether it's a passive or active investment, that we take a holistic view to work with NH together to find what is the best investment to realize our asset allocation in the benefit of our clients.
So I want to know about the performance of the Hanaro TDF. So is it outperforming the market and other TDF products?
Before I comment on the performance, I think it's always useful to put the performance into the context. So we almost have a 5 years anniversary for the Hanoro Target Date Fund. But if you think about the last 5 years, that we have had a global pandemic, and then followed by a inflation spiral, and also the fastest rate hiking cycle in the history. So with all those in mind, we are very, very proud of the performance of the Hanoro Target Date Fund. We are actually from an absolute as well as the relative performance perspective that we outperform not only the benchmark, but also sitting on top of our peer group. So I think it's a very, very strong evidence of our collaboration as well as the portfolio management result.
So the Hanaro TDF invests in global stocks and bonds. So how do you do your asset allocation?
This is very much a very disciplined and dynamic process because retirement investment is a very, very long-term investment. It is easily spanned from 10 plus to even 30 plus years. So we have to take a very, very step-by-step and disciplined approach. It really depends on which part of the cycle of your career or your working life. So, as I mentioned, in the beginning of your career, this is going to be a much higher risk-seeking and return generation. So, that in general, we will have a more equity allocation than the fixed income allocation. But when you are still approaching the retirement, the dynamic will change slightly, and then we'll have a lower equity allocation and higher fixed income allocation. So this is how we actually alter the different part of the allocation to fit into the life cycle.
So it is important to have a good FX strategy when you invest in foreign assets for Koreans, because they have to buy dollar and invest in dollar-denominated assets. So what is your FX strategy? Yeah.
You're right. FX can be a big driver of the return, and we actually take this FX exposure in a very active way. So in general, that we hedge out all the FX exposure from our fixed income portion, because in the terms of the fixed income return, we don't want to have FX to drive our fixed income return contribution. But from the equity side, we take a much more active approach. At this moment, we choose to leave most of our equity exposure unhedged. But at the times that when the currency or the market environment is quite different, then we will start to hedge a bit of the equity. And then that becomes part of our return source.
I want to know more about the hedging. So I heard that you have dynamic risk hedging strategy, and what is that? That's not so familiar to me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is actually, I'm glad you mentioned about this. This is actually one of the key features of our Hanoro Target Date Fund, as opposed to a traditional typical Target Date Fund. They normally have a fixed allocation throughout a different period of time on the equity side. And for us, is retirement investment, one of the key points of that is the downside limitation is very important. Imagine if you are closer to your retirement age and then you have a big drawdown, this is very difficult to come back. So we developed this, what we call the dynamic risk hedging DRH strategy in middle of 2000, and this is also part of our innovation. The idea is we can change dynamically our equity allocation based on the prevailing condition of the market, so that we can be more dynamically adjust our equity allocation as opposed to a fixed equity allocation. The investor could be locked into a higher equity allocation even during the market downturn. A very good example was during the COVID. So we do know, while over a life cycle perspective, you might have a certain level of equity allocation, but during COVID, there's a huge market event, and for us, this is where the downside risk hedging really help us to add value.
So the dynamic risk hedging is one of your innovation, and you have other innovation called factor investment. So what is Allspring's so-called multi-factor investment strategy, and how does it differ from the traditional investment strategy? Yeah.
So our multi-factor, you're right, our multi-factor investment strategy is very much a combined approach, because we believe the combination of quantitative and the qualitative investment can give us, our investors, a better investment outcome. A factor investment essentially is help us using a very consistent as well as a repeatable way to generate the potential alpha and help us also to screen a large investment universe as well as a huge amount of information and then screen it down to a much smaller and manageable universe so that we can apply our fundamental approach to pick up the information that really matters. So in the factor side, we have a long track record to find out what is a company or stocks actually has an attractive valuation and then a good quality and a supportive momentum. Essentially focus on value, quality, momentum and help us to use that to screen down all the investment universe and help us to do the investment in a much more effective and efficient way.
Thank you for your great insight. And do you have more messages for Korean clients?
Yes. So given the focus today, we are talking about the retirement investment. And as I mentioned, this can be a very long-term process requiring a lot of the patience, discipline, as well as the level of the financial knowledge. So from that perspective, I think this is a target date fund is a very, very good compromise as well as a very good tools for our investor to actually delegate this kind of the process to a professional investors. And then they can really just to focus on what is the expected time that they need to retire and then just select the more appropriate fund. So that's the first one. And the second one is when you are choosing the retirement investment, I would encourage people don't just focus on the upside, but equally important to focus on the downside. Target date fund has this advantage of really help investors to limit their downside, which is very important, especially for the long-term investment. We always have this mantra we typically say is, in investment, you win by not losing. So that means that as long as you can control your downside, you will have a higher probability to achieve your investment goal in the long term.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great to have you here. I think I'm gonna say the closing in Korean right now. Yeah. 오늘은 NH 아문디 운용과 하나로 TDF를 함께 운용하는 올스프링 글로벌 인베스트먼트 에디 첸과 함께 인터뷰를 했습니다. 타고난 리스크 관리와 투자 전략으로 우리나라 국민의 은퇴 자금을 든든하게 굴려주고 있는 그런 분과 만나니까 제 마음까지 좀 든든해지는 것 같습니다. 다음에 더 좋은 인터뷰로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 감사합니다.